Are you tired of building infantry sections as the British forces? Well, good news, because I'm about to teach you my mobile assault no section strategy that I used to climb to rank 13 on the ultra competitive British 1v1 leaderboards. The build order for this strategy is Universal Carrier into Royal Engineer Recovery Squad, into Royal Engineer Recovery Squad, into Platoon Command Post, and then upgrade your Universal Carrier with the Vickers K. Universal Carrier first, because at the start of the game the recovery engineers are on cooldown, so you can't field them immediately. And by the time they come off cooldown, you will only be 20 manpower away from being able to call them in, so going for the Universal Carrier first barely slows you down in this regard. Recovery Sappers next, and these have a slight price premium over the regular Sappers you build from your base. However, they spawn at 5 men without having to tick Bolster first, so that means we can skip Bolster the entire game, saving us a good chunk of resources. Also note that they are a call-in squad, so make sure you're bringing them in from the right spawn point to match up to the map and your capping order. Platoon Command next, because the Universal Carrier upgrades are locked behind this stage of tech, and before the upgrade the Universal Carrier doesn't do that much damage in my opinion, so getting this upgrade is a high priority. But this is okay, because Platoon Command is actually quite cheap, convenient since you don't have to send an engineer back to build it, and very fast compared to most other factions, just taking 17.5 seconds to complete. The objective at this phase of the game is to send your Universal Carrier over to the opponent's side of the map with the aim of slowing down their fuel control and thus slowing down the counter to the Universal Carrier arriving. A very important thing to note for the Universal Carrier is that pre-Vickers upgrade it has an unusual weapon profile where it does significantly less damage close range than it does at long range, and this is the opposite of most other light vehicles in this class. Here we have the Soviet M3A1, which does way more damage close than it does at long, whereas the Universal Carrier has a more LMG upgrade on an infantry squad type weapon profile where it does less at close and more far. It also has quite bad moving performance, doing well below half the damage moving compared to stationary. And once again, this is quite a lot worse than most other scout cars, which tend to do roughly exactly half. So yeah, the keys to using the Universal Carrier during this phase, you want to keep it at long range and you want to keep it stationary whenever possible. But this does kind of work out in your favor, especially when you're going up against Ostheer. You have those grenadiers with the long-range Panzerfaust right from the start of the game. So now if we take a look at the Vickers K upgrade for the Universal Carrier, you can see it more than doubles your damage up close range, so it's great. And then at long range it adds extra 50% or so, so it really rounds out the damage profile of the Universal Carrier. You also get a bonus 5 range here, going up to 40 range. So if you've got a spotter, this really helps. Same story if you're kiting away, sometimes the extra 5 range can be quite handy. And then unfortunately the moving performance graph doesn't work for this since it has some AoE values here rather confusingly, but does have a slightly better moving accuracy multiplier than the Bren does on the Universal Carrier, so it does seem like it does improve your moving performance quite a lot as well. Also important to note for the Universal Carrier is that although its acceleration and rotation are very, very fast, its actual top speed is quite low. So this means if Axis light vehicles get in range of it, such as the 222, you won't be able to outrun it, so you will almost certainly die. And now some tips on how to get the best out of your Royal Engineer recovery squads. Royal Engineers have a 25% capture speed bonus, meaning you can cap up the map very quickly with them, and this makes up for the fact that you went for the Universal Carrier first. Their anti-tank grenade is unlocked at Platoon Command Post, which can be important to know if you're facing off against a coup wagon. Same story for their smoke grenade, which costs 15 munitions and also is unlocked at Platoon Command. So this is another reason that the fast Platoon Command works out, because these smoke grenades are really helpful when dealing with your opponent's machine guns. However, if you do choose to upgrade them with the flamethrower, they lose access to the smoke grenade. In the early stages, I generally prioritize planting mines over the flamethrower upgrade to try and keep the Universal Carrier safe, though once the munitions come available, I do upgrade a squad with the flamethrower, and if you're having trouble with a squad inside a building, feel free to get the flamethrower early. So now let's look at the recovery sappers matchups in the early game so you know how to get the best out of them. Against pioneers starting at close range, the recovery sappers completely dominate with over half health remaining, and you can even charge into them sitting behind heavy cover and still be expected to win. Charging in against grenadiers behind no cover, the recovery sappers can expect to win with around quarter of their health remaining. And then with the grenadiers behind heavy cover, the matchup becomes roughly 50-50 dependent on the model drops the Royal Engineers take on the way in. Stern Pioneers have a huge edge over the recovery sappers mid to long range. The recovery sappers charging in against the Stern Pios also goes very poorly for them. Typically Stern Pioneers have over half health remaining. Starting the fight at point blank goes a little bit better for the recovery sappers, bringing the Stern Pioneers to around 1/3 health. And if the Stern Pioneers charge into the recovery sappers, the matchup is close to 50-50. So try soften them up first with your long range, or set up 2-on-1s if possible. The matchup against Volksgrenadiers is almost identical to the Grenadier matchup. Charging in on them with no cover, the sappers should win with around quarter of their health remaining. And charging in on them behind heavy cover makes it close to a 50-50. Also be aware that in the latest patch the Sapper's Vet 1 bonus was altered to work while stationary instead of while in cover. This should give you quite a lot more opportunities to make use of the Vet 1 bonus, and it does give a pretty noticeable DPS boost. Recovery Sappers can also salvage wrecks, though these don't give you a huge amount of resources. Salvaging this Panzer IV wreck gives 9 fuel and 12 munitions, and this 222 wreck gives 4 fuel and 7 munitions. The recovery sappers also have a 16% repair speed bonus over regular sappers. From here the build orders can diverge a bit depending on how strong your early game was and what your opponent's up to. Generally you want medics, an anti-tank gun, 2 squads of commandos with Brens equipped, into a fast Cromwell, but how you get there may vary. Against Ostheer, if you had a strong early game, thus delaying their 222, you can go for medics or a heavy machine gun, sometimes both, before the 6-pounder anti-tank gun, to help keep your universal carrier safe from the 222. However, if you had a poor early game, go straight for the 6-pounder. Against a sniper, I would generally avoid getting the Vickers heavy machine gun, since it will be a bit of a sitting duck, and perhaps go for an anti-tank gun into my own sniper and then look for the counter snipe, though this commander doesn't have any recon planes to reveal your opponent's sniper to give you a leg up into the counter sniping war. You can get access to a recon plane from the Assault Officer's Vet 1 ability, but I feel like this is a bit slow and probably shouldn't be necessary with this strategy unless you're up against an absolute sniper master. Depending on the map and scenario, you can deploy some infiltration commandos and look for the wipe on your opponent's sniper that way. GG. Or you could sneak around with the commandos in camo and try to spring an ambush on the sniper close range. Against Osttroopen, I like to get a 3rd squad of recovery sappers for some more field presence in the early game, and upgraded with the flamethrower they are quite good against the cover reliant Osttroopen. And this will generally mean you go for 1 less commando squad. Against OKW at the moment, the vast majority of my games they are going for battle group instead of mechanized, which means the flak half track. And since that can't fire on the move, your universal carrier is safe from getting chased down and killed, so generally I go for an anti-tank gun reactively once I see the flak half track on the field. The reason for this is that your opponent could skip a light vehicle altogether and double down on infantry at this phase, and if you end up going for an anti-tank gun with nothing to fire at, this can cause you to fall quite badly behind in the infantry engagements. So here is the most common build order against OKW. When using a universal carrier against OKW, be aware that they can build a Raketin at any stage. So if they are giving you an engagement that looks too good to be true, they could be trying to bait you to stay in position while their Raketin gets the shot off. So if possible, try and stay above 160 health on your universal carrier, which looks like this. The same principle also applies to Stern Pioneers, who can surprise you by popping the Panzerschreck upgrade. If it has been a relatively slow-paced early game, your command points may be too low to field your commandos at a reasonable timing. In these cases, consider taking company command post, which gives you roughly 1/3 of a command point, so you can get out your commandos a bit earlier. So you may be thinking commandos are a close range squad, why would you equip them with Brens? Well, they actually get a different version of the Bren to infantry sections. As you can see here, the commando Bren does around 50% more damage at close range and close to 75% more damage long range, and this makes them lethal long range, able to hold their own against anything apart from highly vetted obers. They can also fire the Bren while moving, and this does drop their DPS by more than half, but at least they can do some damage compared to infantry sections which are completely unable to fire the Bren while moving. So let's cover a few of the Brenmando's matchups in the late game so you know how to get the most out of them. Starting with LMG Grenadiers long range, and the Brenmando should win with around half health remaining. Against Panzer Grenadiers point blank, the matchup is close to 50-50. Against fully upgraded Fallschirmjäger close range, the commandos have a small advantage, winning with around quarter of their health remaining. Note that all of these tests are being done without the ambush bonus on both sides. Against Fallschirmjäger long range, the Brenmandos have a small edge, but they definitely can lose. And against Obersoldaten long range, the Obersoldaten should win with around quarter of their health remaining. Moving into the late game after you've got your Cromwell out, the build order is Mortar Pit into Hammer Anvil into Commodore Churchill. If you're doing really well in terms of fuel control, you may want to delay your Mortar Pit until after the Commodore Churchill. And if you're struggling, you should delay your Mortar Pit and go for a second anti-tank gun to help you hold on. Now you're probably asking why the Mortar Pit instead of the Land Mattress that is only available in this commander. I did play extensively with both, and at least for 1v1 I found the Mortar Pit to be superior for the following reasons. The Land Mattress fires its rockets at a relatively slow rate, and it also has quite bad AoE damage on the rockets. These factors combined make it significantly worse than other pieces of rocket artillery at wiping squads. The Land Mattress is crewed by infantry instead of being a vehicle, and this means it is slow to rotate to face a target and then start firing off its rockets. This means you often miss opportunities for good rocket artillery barrages because the Land Mattress is so slow to rotate to face the target. It also means that you can't use the tactic where you move into close range to go for a tight scatter barrage and then back away to safety once the barrage is finished. This is both because the Land Mattress moves around so slowly, and it also takes so long to fire off its payload. So if it is in a compromised position further up the map, your opponent has plenty of time to get there and kill it before it has finished firing its rockets. You can generally plant the Mortar Pit somewhere very safe and still have it reach one or two of the victory points, either with its auto fire or regular barrage. This makes it great for victory point control and a consistent tool for bleeding your opponent's manpower while they try to cap the victory points. And once you unlock the heavy barrage by ticking either Hammer or Anvil, the Mortar Pit gets excellent range. This means it can often reach the opponent's Schwerpanzer headquarters even if they were relatively conservative with their placement of it. And generally this means that the opponent now wants to attack you to knock out the Mortar Pit, and often Brits play better on defense than they do on attack, so this is great. You may also be wondering why not just forget about Hammer or Anvil, stay at company command post and spam Cromwells, and while this strategy is viable, I do not believe it is optimal. The Cromwell has a poor AT damage distance alongside not particularly good scatter. The Cromwell's machine guns are also not particularly impressive, being roughly on par with the Panzer IV. However, it does not have a Pintle machine gun upgrade to boost up its anti-infantry DPS. These factors combined mean the Cromwell is probably the worst of all the different factions, generalist medium tanks in an anti-infantry role. So if you try to spam them, you'll probably fall behind in manpower bleed and squad wipes. You can somewhat make up for the Cromwell's lack of anti-infantry capabilities through its crushing ability, but these maneuvers are often quite hard to execute and risky since you have to get right on top of the enemy squad, potentially putting you in range of the anti-tank sources or to take a snare. This also means that if you try to do an aggressive maneuver with the Cromwell that relies on decrewing your opponent's anti-tank gun in a timely manner, these often backfire because the Cromwell takes too long to get the damage done. And this is where the Pintle machine gun upgrades can make a massive difference. Often, during these scenarios, you cannot get the hull gun that's on the front of your tank to face the enemy's anti-tank gun, and this limits your DPS. Whereas the omnidirectional Pintle upgrade can fire the entire time, making the decrew process much faster. So which of the late game tech options works best with this commander, Hammer or Anvil? At least for 1v1 I believe that it is Hammer, but not by a very large margin. The Comet is significantly faster than the Churchill and has higher frontal armor, so this generally means in similar scenarios it ends up taking less damage. And this lower amount of damage synergizes much better with the vehicle crew repairs which are available in this commander. They only heal for 500 damage, which is kind of like a drop in the ocean for the Churchill. So since this is one of the main munition sinks for this commander, you might as well pick the tank that has better synergy with it. As a side note, when using this ability, be careful, because the smoke dropping in gives away your low health vehicle's position, potentially causing your opponent to dive in for the kill. And these extra repairs required by the Churchill mean your engineers spend more time off the front line, leading to poor map control since you don't have a bunch of infantry sections for that role. Anvil does have some benefits however. It can be a very effective tactic against OKW to charge into their flak base with your Churchill leading the way to soak the damage, and then throw off the artillery flares with your infantry section. The extra damage from the airburst shells from having Anvil make this a quick and easy kill with relatively low risk. And you can upgrade the engineers with both the flamethrower and the heavy upgrade, which gives them access to the Vickers, which is more like a bar than a Bren these days, and this makes them quite formidable close range in the late game. Whichever option you take, neither the Churchill nor the Comet are especially good against infantry right out of the gate, but I would urge some patience because they both get a lot better at Vet 1. The main gun and machine guns on the Churchill are almost identical to those that are on the Cromwell, so this leads to very similar and slightly lackluster anti-infantry performance. However, at Vet 1 the Churchill gets a pintle machine gun, and this extra damage makes it a consistent infantry bleeder. The Comet, on the other hand, gains access to the white phosphorus shell ability at Vet 1, and this does strong damage over time to any infantry that stands inside it. However, it cannot outright kill the infantry, only bring them down to 1 HP. And this is very strong against team weapons that can take a while to pack up and thus get out of the phosphorus, or against handheld anti-infantry squads trying to chase down the Comet, because once they have pushed through the phosphorus, they are generally so low in health they are very susceptible to getting wiped by the Comet. Now you may have noticed that I have not mentioned the Mortar that is available in the commander at all so far, and that's because I'm not really a fan of it in 1v1. Between the 1v1 map pool and the way that this strategy plays out in the early to mid game, I don't think that getting the Mortar should be necessary, and in the late game you're better off getting the Mortar Pit, which has a much better chance of wiping the opponent's infantry when both shells land in quick succession, and from the excellent heavy barrage. However, in team games, the Mortar may be a better option. A lot of the maps have the style where they're broken down into 3 or 4 lanes, and these can be tough to flank the wide arc axis machine guns on in the early to mid game, which can make this Mortar a nice option. A lot of the maps also have very strong buildings on them that can be tough to deal with without a Mortar. And finally, in team games, it is much more common for the Axis to use commanders that have access to incendiary barrages, such as the infantry support guns from Firestorm in OKW, or the Mortar half-track that is available on multiple commanders for Ostheer. And these are very effective at countering the Mortar Pit, so this can make the regular Mortar the better option. And for that same reason, the Lamb Mattress may be the better choice than the Mortar Pit in the late game for team games. Stacked on top of that, the Lamb Mattress is generally at its best when it's barraging OKW forward retreat point trucks, or flak trucks with double infantry support guns next to them, something that is very rare in 1v1. So now you're on board and you want to try out this strategy, but what are some of the main weaknesses that you need to look out for? Royal Engineers do not gain any combat bonuses at all at Vet 2, unlike every other engineering squad in the game. And at this phase you'll most likely be up against Axis main lines with their weapons upgraded, along with their Vet 2 high accuracy bonuses, and this means the Royal Engineers have a habit of dropping like flies until they hit Vet 3, potentially bleeding you a lot of manpower. And on some of the larger maps that are tough to cover with just one anti-tank gun, your opponent's light vehicle can bleed you for a lot of manpower. So on those maps it is probably worth delaying your commandos and going for the AEC. And finally, the icing on the cake, what Bulletins do I recommend you use with this strategy? Of course, you go with the Royal Engineers 5% more experience, since you'll be utilizing them a lot. Commando SMG 5% faster cooldown, because even though you do equip them with the Brens, you still do make quite a lot of use of the SMGs. And then the Vickers 10% reload. I generally do end up building one of these per game, and its reload is quite slow, so this can help you out. And if you're a team game player planning to get the land mattress, maybe you'll want to consider going for that one. So there you go guys, I hope you found this to be very informative, and if you want more guides like this in the future, please consider coming on board as a Patreon backer.